So a few days ago, I was talking to a friend of mine, and she was telling me of this experience of how her life got better, took a positive turn. And in describing this experience to me, she says, and then God just showed up, and life got better. Now, I try not to be hypercritical of people when they talk about God, and especially when it's my friends. And I also get it that we all, at some points, talk about God in the most theologically incoherent ways. So I want to be gracious. But it was one of these moments for me. It was like, wait a minute. If God just showed up, like, where was God before this? And where was God after this? And where is God now? And if God just showed up, it's this God who kind of jumps in and out of our lives and in and out of history. And really, this God becomes, in essence, optional. Because the world, the cosmos, will go on just fine without this God. And furthermore, if God just showed up for you, then why isn't God showing up for all of those people who could really use a little showing up from God? But I think there's another way to see God, another way to understand God, another way to experience God. It's the God I've come to know through scriptures and through the tradition and through my experience. And it says that God is everywhere, all the time, all around us, breathing life into people, places, and things. And sometimes we are aware of this. And we're referring to those times in this series, this sermon series, as moments. Now, the ancient Hebrews had a way of talking about these moments because they believed that God was actually breathing life into everything all the time. They believed that God's Spirit was constantly on the move. And so the word they use for this God breathing and God's Spirit is ruach. So everyone say it with me, ruach. Ruach. Pretty good. Someone had the back of the throat. It's not ruah or ruach. It's that back of the throat ancient Hebrew term ruach. And it's kind of soothing to say. There, Edie's got it. Now, my favorite theologian, one of my favorite theologians and authors, Rob Bell, he says this of the ancient Hebrews. They believe that everything you and I know to be everything that exists because of an explosive, expansive, surprising creative energy that surges through all things, holding everything all together and giving the universe its life and depth and fullness. They called this cosmic electricity, this expressed power, this divine energy, the Ruah of God. For them, eating and drinking and pasta and the moon and all of creation, all relationships were God-breathed. And they had one thing in common. This creative energy, this sustaining force was God. Now, they understood Ruah to be as wide as the universe and powerful enough to sustain even the stars. But they also believed Ruah was as personal and intimate as the breath you just took and the breath you're about to take. The psalmist in Psalm 139 says it this way. Where could I go to get away from your spirit, Ruah? Where could I go to escape your presence? If I went to heaven, you would be there. If I went down to the grave, you would be there too. We see Ruah in the simple, ordinary, mundane moments all around us. But these simple, ordinary, and mundane moments always point to something beyond themselves. So you might see Ruah, like me, in sunsets, especially sunsets on the beach. I know something about sunsets on the beach because my family and I just got back from a week in Florida, And each evening we were there, we tried to capture the sunset on the beach. Now, not only does the sunset on the beach give these fantastic colors and this beautiful backdrop, but it says something more profound. As you're standing at that threshold, the place where the ocean meets the sands, you notice that the ocean is breathing with creation as it goes in and then back out, and in and then back out. And as you're standing there, you realize that you are this really small thing in this really big thing. And surely the world is more than just about me. The opening lines in Genesis say that when God began to create the heavens and the earth was without shape or form. It was dark over the deep sea, and God's wind, ruach, God's breath, swept over the waters. It's not exactly how it happened, but they're telling us the story of God's Spirit moving. Now, maybe you see ruach in those other simple moments. Dinner with friends. And you leave that dinner thinking, this was more than just the pasta. This was more than just the conversation. What happened here was a sharing of life together. Something deeper was happening, and God was all over this. God was all around this. You see, Ruach says to us, slow down. Pay attention. This is significant. This matters. Don't let this pass you by. This is worth capturing. You might see Ruach through watching your children play together. There is no greater moment that I want to capture more than when I see Selah and Shiloh playing together and laughing together, because it says something profound about what I want the world to be. It says the world should be this way. It says this is how relationships should be. This is gratitude. Pay attention. Slow down. This is worth capturing. And you see, when we're aware, we start seeing God everywhere. And all sorts of people, all sorts of different places and different events. And you see, I think the goal for us as people of faith is to actually be aware and to pray for that awareness. And the ancient Hebrews, they got this. And when they got it, they pinned it. They wrote it down, and then they told stories. They told stories about how God was moving. Why? Because they believed these moments of Ruach could actually change and transform their lives and the life of the community. It was a story worth telling. Where is God moving in our midst? So our dryer went out last month. And the thing would still tumble and spin, but it wouldn't heat up. Now, before I go any further in this story, I have to tell you, when it comes to being a handyman, that's right, I'm not. Thank you, Jim. I was going to have my wife vouch for that, but I guess you can too. I am not a handyman. In fact, I had to go next door to borrow the screwdrivers. But so I found this piece, this heating element on Amazon, and I ordered it. And when it came in, instead of calling my friend who said he would come help me, I thought, well, surely this can't be too difficult. And I was really busy that evening, but I thought, this cannot take more than an hour. So I did what you all would have done. I pulled up YouTube, and I watched a video on it. But the problem was, the video was a very different model than the dryer we had owned. So here I am unscrewing things that weren't meant to be unscrewed. I'm twisting and bending metal in ways it's not meant to bend. Long story short, 2.5 hours later, I'm frustrated and sweating. Sailors look at me like I'm crazy. Here I am on the phone with a random appliance guy. And I said, can you come out in the next day or two and help me fix this dryer? And he said, well, actually, my dinner plans have canceled, so I could come this evening. And I thought, perfect. Tammy's at work tonight. She'll think I still did something good. All is good in the world. So JR gets to my door. I've never met JR. He gets to my door. I let him in. He's working on the dryer. I was busy this night. I was working on my storyline book. Now, Storyline, these are these small groups we're starting at St. Luke's. We'll launch them more fully in the fall. But it's 8 weeks of finding your story of who you are in God's bigger story. And you do this together and you share your story together. It's a really powerful thing. I'm working on my storyline, and I start to feel guilty because I've shown JR no hospitality. And I used to canvass for the Rape Crisis Center in college. And so I know what, like, strangers coming to the door, what it means to have hospitality shown to you. And so I stop what I'm doing, I close the book, and I go into the laundry room. And I offer JR something to drink. And I said, "How long have you been doing this?" And he said, "Well, it's a family tradition from my grandpa. My grandpa taught me the trade, and I'm taking on the family business." And then he asked me that dreadful question, "What do you do?" And when you're a pastor, this can go wrong in every way possible. So sometimes it's easier to lie. But I was honest. I said, "Well, I'm a pastor." His eyes get as big as saucers. He lays his tools down, and I'm not kidding you. This is verbatim what he said, exact words. He said, "I have this incredible story with God. I just need some coaching on how to tell it." And at this point, I'm curious. So I say, "Well, what is this incredible story?" And he says, "Well," and JR's my age, about my age. He says, "When I was younger, my friend introduced me to methamphetamine. And I was only going to do it one time, but from that day forward, it took 8 years of my life. And somewhere along the way, I found myself being sentenced to 9 years in prison, of which I only served 2 because I had good behavior." And he said, "Like most people in prison, I found God. But for me, it was real." And I said, "Well, what made it real?" He said, "When I was in prison, I realized all of the people I had hurt. I realized all of the relationships I had destroyed. I realized all of the harm I brought into the world." And he said, "Life is so different now." JR has been clean and sober for 8 years. And I said, "Well, tell me, what's different?" And he said, "It's amazing. I can actually get up every morning and exercise. I never wanted to be outside when I was on the drug." And he gets a smile, and he says, "It's amazing. My relationship with my kids is restored. I can actually take them to the park and play. I can actually go to their sporting events. I can actually be present in their lives." And the smile on his face gets bigger. And he says, "A couple of years ago, I met this really beautiful woman. And last year we got married. And it's been the best year of my life." JR and his wife will be in one of our Storyline groups this fall. What would have happened if I did not participate? If I went into my being busy and gave that up over relationship? And that's what we do when we're not aware. We tell ourselves we're busy. We tell ourselves we got too much on our plate, and we miss relationship. So I think the goal, the challenge for you and me, is for you and me to be the kind of people who are aware of the divine presence, aware of the Ruach moments all around us, so that we might see God in more people, places, and events each and every day. Where are you encountering these Ruach moments? So during last service, I posted on my Facebook page almost this exact question. Where are you encountering God's moving? Where are you seeing God's divine breath around you? And so I hope after lunch today, after you discuss with your friends and family where you're seeing God moving, God's Spirit breathe, I hope you'll, and if you're not a friend of mine on Facebook and you have Facebook, please friend me and engage that question. Not just for me, but for others to see, so that we can begin pinning and telling the story of God's movement in our lives and the life of this community. One more word on Ruach. I think Ruach not only reminds us that God is everywhere, But it says to us very clearly that life is fragile. And the ancient Hebrews got this one too. Job understood that we wouldn't have breath, this God-given breath, forever here on earth. And he says, as long as breath is in me and God's breath, ruach, is in my nostrils, life is fragile. And the wisdom teacher of Ecclesiastes in chapter 12 says, before dust returns to earth as it was before, and the life breath, ruach, returns to the God who gave it. Life is fragile. And you might experience ruach through the sitting of someone as they take their last breaths. You might experience ruach through seeing the hands of a little baby. I remember holding Selah and Shiloh for the first time, and it was their hands. Their hands were so incredibly amazing. And it said more than just infants have small hands and adults have larger hands. It said that this is important, this matters. Life is fragile, life is sacred. Paul called me on Tuesday afternoon. This Tuesday. We got back on Monday from vacation at about 1:30 in the morning. I was dragging and tired, and you know how it is to play catch up after a wonderful vacation. Paul calls. I'd never met Paul. I'd never spoken to Paul, and he wanted to meet right away. I said, I can't meet right away, but I can meet you tomorrow morning first thing. And so he came into my office at 9:30 in the morning. And here's my moment of honesty with you. My thought was that morning, how can I get him in my office and out of my office as quickly as possible so I can go on to the things that need to get done? And before Paul got there, this does not happen to me very often, but before he got there, I clearly heard God's Spirit saying to me, slow down. Don't miss this. And Paul comes into my office, and he plops down on my couch, and he says, Pastor, can I take my shoes off? And he takes his shoes off, and his feet are swollen, big. And I said, what's going on? He said, well, it's a long story. I thought, well, perfect. I wanted to get you out of here as quickly as possible, but God told me to slow down, so I guess I've got the time. He said, everything changed just over a year ago. He was a big businessman traveling all over the world. And he said, I was at my hotel, and I went down for breakfast and had my eggs Benedict, just like always. I went back up to my room to gather my things for the day, and he said, Pastor, I couldn't breathe. It was like someone took my breath away. And so in this moment of panic, I walked to the balcony of my hotel. And down below, I was lucky enough that there was an ambulance and 2 paramedics. And he motioned for them to come up in a panic. And that's it. That's all he remembers. He woke up 10 days later from a coma in the hospital. Paul had an aortic dissection. It's the same thing that John Ritter died from. It's the same thing that Albert Einstein died from. And he said, everything is so different now. And he begins pulling up his pant legs, showing me the scars because they had to reroute all his veins. He opens his shirt and shows me the scar running down his chest. Everything is so different. And I said, I can't imagine. How has this changed just your day-to-day life? And he begins to cry. And he says, I'm 49 years old, and I have a 6-year-old son. I just want to be present. I want to be a better father. He says, it's not just that. He said, before I could buy anything I wanted to buy, I could go anywhere I wanted to go, and I could do anything I wanted to do. I had so much, and now I realize all that God has given me, even with nothing. And he opens up his backpack, and he's carrying a brand new pair of shoes. And he says, I try to carry a brand new pair of shoes to give to someone whose feet hurt, because I know what it's like to have your feet throb. And he said, it's not very often, but when I do have a couple of extra bucks, I just want to take someone out for coffee or take them to lunch and get to know them better. Ruah calls us to be people of integrity. It says to us, slow down. Life is fragile. He went back to the balcony experience, and with a huge smile, he said, Pastor, it was amazing. It was like God was breathing through me, through these paramedics. God gave me life. Some of you know exactly what Paul is talking about. Those moments of desperation, those moments of hopelessness, those moments in your greatest pain and your biggest wounds, desperate for God to come and breathe with you and sometimes for you. And I've told you the story before of my brother's death, but I'll never forget the phone call from Mom of hearing of that. And the phone drops out of my hands, and I literally couldn't breathe. I was gasping for air, desperate to find some sort of life. And Ruach comes along and says to us, I am here, breathing with you, breathing life all around you. Will you join me in this breathing? Will you participate with what I'm doing all around you?